If you claim dependents, you are usually able to claim tax credits for doing so. But how much? Well, like most things in the tax code, it depends. I'm the Tax Geek, and here are child and dependent tax credits, oversimplified. First, for a rundown on what qualifies a person to be a dependent, click the card above or the link in the description below. There are 3 credits available to a taxpayer who claims dependents: child tax credit, additional child tax credit, and credit for other dependents. Let's look at the child tax credit first. Starting in 2025, the child tax credit is a tax credit of up to $2,200 per child who qualifies. This maximum credit will be increased for inflation starting in 2026. To be eligible, a child must meet the qualified child tests. The dependent must be your child, stepchild, or foster child, your sibling that is younger than you, or any of their descendants. They must have lived with you for at least half the year. They do not provide over 50% of their own support, and they are under the age of 17. This credit is non-refundable, meaning the credit is limited to your tax liability. For example, Ida is a single mother with 1 child. Her income consists of $32,000 in wages. In this case, her tax liability would be $838. Since that is less than the maximum child tax credit of $2,200, her child tax credit would be limited to that amount. If your adjusted gross income is over $200,000 or $400,000 for married couples filing jointly, the credit is reduced by 5% for each $1,000 your AGI exceeds the threshold. Jerry and Alice have 3 children under 17, and their joint adjusted gross income is $478,250. The $400 phase-out threshold is subtracted from this amount to arrive at $78,250. This figure is, in turn, multiplied by 0.05, which yields $3,950. This figure is then subtracted from the maximum child tax credit they could qualify for, and the result is a $2,650 reduced child tax credit. If Jerry and Alice had only 1 child, the calculated reduction would be greater than the $2,200 maximum child tax credit. So in this case, their child tax credit would be 0. Now, if your child tax credit is limited because of your tax liability, you may be eligible for additional child tax credit. The additional child tax credit is a credit of up to $1,700 that is calculated based on your earned income. It is also refundable, which means it can increase your refund. Here is how the additional child tax credit is calculated. $2,500 is subtracted from a taxpayer's earned income, which is income from wages and self-employment. The resulting figure is then multiplied by 15%. This figure is then compared to 2 other figures: $1,700, which is the maximum additional child tax credit, and the difference between the maximum child tax credit of $2,200 and the child tax credit that the taxpayer actually received. The smallest of these 3 figures is the additional child tax credit. Let's go back to Ida's example. She received $838 in child tax credit, so she should be eligible for additional child tax credit. We take her $32,000 in wages and subtract $2,500, yielding $29,500. We multiply that figure by 15%, which is $4,425. We then compare that figure to 2 other figures: the $1,700 maximum additional child tax credit, and the difference between the maximum child tax credit and the child tax credit she actually received is $1,362. The smallest of those 3 figures, $1,362, is the additional child tax credit which would be refunded to Ida. Any dependent who does not meet the qualifications for child or additional child tax credit may be eligible for the credit for other dependents. This is a flat $500 tax credit. This credit is non-refundable, which means the credit is limited to tax liability. A qualifying dependent for the credit for other dependents must be your child, stepchild, or foster child, your siblings, or any of their descendants, plus your parents, their siblings, or any of their ancestors. They must have gross taxable income of less than $5,200. You must provide over 50% of their support, and they cannot be the qualified child of another taxpayer. The credit for other dependents is taken before child tax credit in order to maximize additional child tax credit. So let's change Ida's story a bit. In addition to her child under 17, she also claims her older child who is aged 20. She is not a student, and she earned $3,750 from working a part-time job. Ida provides over 1/2 of her support, Therefore, she qualifies as a dependent under the qualified relative rules. The $500 credit for other dependents is subtracted from her $838 tax liability, leaving $338. This figure would be her child tax credit. Same as before, her $32,000 in wages less $2,500 multiplied by 15% yields the same $4,425 as it did before. This figure is compared to the maximum additional child tax credit of $1,700 and the difference between the maximum child tax credit and the child tax credit she actually received. That is $2,200 minus $338, or $1,862. The lowest of these figures is $1,700 and is thus her additional child tax credit. So in this case, we get a $500 credit for other dependents, a $338 child tax credit, and a $1,700 additional child tax credit. Dependent credits are calculated and reported on Schedule 8812. Part 1 of the schedule applies the AGI limitations from before and determines the non-refundable portion of the child tax credit and the credit for other dependents. The additional tax credit is calculated in Part 2 of the schedule. Let's go ahead and fill out Ida's Schedule 8812. Ida's adjusted gross income is entered on lines 1 and 3 of the schedule since she is not excluding any foreign income. She has one child under age 17, so she enters $2,200 on line 5. The credit for her older child goes on lines 6 and 7. These credits are added together and entered on line 8. The phase-out threshold of $200,000 goes on line 9. Since her income is well under this threshold, $2,700 is placed on line 12. Her tax liability before any credits is entered on line 13. Since this amount is less than the maximum credits she could have claimed, $838 is the non-refundable portion of her child and other dependent credits. In Part 2 of the schedule, we calculate Ida's additional child tax credit. We start by subtracting the amount on line 14 from the maximum child and other dependent credits she could claim. The result goes on line 16A. She has one qualifying child for the additional child tax credit, so we place $1,700 on line 16B. Since the amount is lower than the amount on line 16A, $1,700 is also entered on line 17. Ida's earned income of $32,000 goes on line 18A. We subtract $2,500 from that amount and the result is placed on line 19. We take 15% of this figure and that result, $4,425, ends up on line 20. Since the amount on line 20 is greater than the amount on line 17, the $1,700 from line 17 is placed on line 27. This is her additional child tax credit. The non-refundable portion of the child tax credit and the credit for other dependents is entered directly on line 19 of Form 1040. Additional child tax credit is transferred from line 27 of Schedule 8812 to line 28 of Form 1040. Now there are some additional details to these credits, but this video covers most taxpayer situations. Links to additional resources and information can be found in the video description. If you found this video informative, please give it a like and share it with anyone who might find it useful. Subscribe to the channel for more oversimplifications of our increasingly overcomplicated tax system. If you have questions, comments, or suggestions for future videos, please leave them in the comment section below. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for more of Your Taxes Oversimplified.